Finn discovers shocking truth about his identity, Taylor's bombshell exposed. On an emotionally explosive week of The Bold and the Beautiful, Los Angeles was formerly again the background for secrets unraveling and individualities shattering as Dr. John Finn Finnegan set up himself at the center of a disclosure that would rock not only his marriage to Steffy but the veritably foundation of everything he believed about himself, his history, and the woman he trusted as a guiding force in his life, Dr. Taylor Hayes. It began still nearly deceptively so with Finn reviewing old sanitarium records after a routine executive inspection at the clinic, paperwork that should have been pointless, just figures and autographs and dates, but commodity about a distinction in his birth train caught his trained medical eye, a missing croaker ID, a redacted memorandum that had no way been duly logged into the system, and when he requested the original archived document, the clerk dithered in a way that incontinently put him on alert, because Finn had erected his entire life on data, on wisdom, on verity that could be tested and vindicated. And this bitsy irregularity felt like a crack in the glass of his own history. At home, Steffy Forrester Finnegan tasted his distraction incontinently, her sharp instincts honed by times of navigating the dramatic currents of the Forrester dynasty, and though she tried to lighten the mood with talk of the kiddies and an forthcoming Forrester Creations event, Finn's mind kept drifting back to the train, to the hand that didn't match the name of the attending croaker he'd always been told delivered him, and by the time he returned to the sanitarium the coming morning, he was determined to uncover the full story, ignorant that his hunt would lead him straight to Taylor Hayes and a verity she had buried decades agone. Taylor, meanwhile, had been scuffling with her own ghosts, her history of complicated love triangles with Brooke Logan and Ridge Forrester long behind her yet ever always resurfacing in new forms, and when she entered a call from an old coworker advising her that Finn had penetrated non-public libraries connected to a sealed case from times past, the color drained from her face because she knew exactly which case that was, the one decision she had made in a moment of despair and heartache that she had induced herself was justified, indeed necessary. Finn's battle wasn't explosive at first, it was controlled, clinical, nearly eerily calm as he sat across from Taylor in her living room, the late autumn sun casting long murk across the polished bottoms, and he asked her directly why his birth records had been altered, why the attending croaker listed had no medical license traceable in any database, and why her name appeared in the perimeters of a train she had no sanctioned reason to pierce at the time. Taylor tried to redirect, to frame it as a pastoral error, but Finn's steady aspect and quiet asseveration left her with nowhere to hide, and eventually, with gashes welling in her eyes, she admitted that the story Finn had always been told about his origins was deficient, that while he'd grown up believing he was fairly espoused under straightforward circumstances, the reality was far more complicated and far more particular than he could imagine. Decades ago, Taylor had been involved in a non-public case involving a invigorated whose natural mama had failed under woeful circumstances, a case tied to an important family hopeless to avoid reproach, and in the chaos of that moment, Taylor had interposed in ways that blurred ethical lines, icing that the child would be placed with loving parents but also icing that certain names no way appeared on sanctioned documents, and that child, she confessed in a voice pulsing with both guilt and fear, was Finn. The disclosure hit him like a physical blow, not because he misdoubted the love of the parents who raised him but because the recrimination was clear. His entire identity had been curated, shaped by opinions made behind unrestricted doors without his knowledge or concurrence, and when he pressed further, asking who his natural father was and why similar lengths had been taken to conceal the verity, Taylor dithered again, and that vacillation told him everything, because in the world of Forrester Creations and the families ringing it, secrets were currency and maternity twists were virtually tradition. Taylor eventually revealed that Finn's natural father had been connected to the Forrester circle in a way that would enkindle old battles and renew injuries aloud. Long healed, a man whose relationship with Taylor at the time had been complicated by heartache and treason, and though she stopped suddenly of naming him outright in that first concession, the recrimination that Finn's birth intertwined with the veritably dynasty he'd married into transferred shockwaves through his sense of tone. When Steffy learned of the battle, her defensive instincts burned, not just as Finn's woman, but as a Forrester who understood how dangerous buried secrets could come when exposed, and she demanded to know why her mama had kept such a stunner hidden for so long, why she had allowed Finn to navigate his life ignorant of the verity about his origins, and Taylor, possessed by the two people she loved most, eventually laid everything bare, confessing that Finn's natural father was none other than a man whose history with her had been shrouded in contestation and pain, a man whose name carried weight and power in Los Angeles society. As the name left her lips, Finn felt the ground shift beneath him because it connected blotches he had indeed known were missing, moments in his nonage when non-natives had sounded oddly attentive, openings that had appeared out of nowhere, a sense that unseen hands had guided his path further than coexistence alone could explain. The fallout was immediate and far-reaching, with whispers spreading through the Forrester manse as Ridge plotted to reuse how this disclosure would alter the family dynamic, Brooke Logan scuffling with the irony of yet another secret surfacing from Taylor's history, and indeed Eric Forrester forced to defy the possibility that the heritage of his conglomerate extended in ways he'd no way anticipated. Finn, caught in the eye of the storm, oscillated between wrathfulness and a hopeless need for clarity, demanding DNA evidence despite Taylor's concession because he demanded commodity concrete, commodity measurable, and when the test results arrived, they verified what Taylor had admitted. The man in question was indeed his natural father, binding Finn to a lineage steeped in both prestige and reproach. The emotional weight of that verity pressed down on him as he stood alone on the escarpments overlooking the Pacific, scuffling with questions about fortune, about whether his magnet to Steffy had been pure chance or some subconscious pull toward a world that had always been tied to him by blood, and when he eventually returned home, he made it clear that while he could forgive the deception in time, he could no way again accept half-trueness or defensive falsehoods, not from Taylor, not from anyone. Taylor, devastated yet oddly relieved that the secret was eventually out, pledged to rebuild trust with both Finn and Steffy, admitting that her attempt to shield them had only strengthened the fracture. Meanwhile, the disclosure burned new pressures within the broader family, with some seeing Finn as an indeed more integral part of the Forrester heritage and others questioning the counter-accusations of his recently uncovered heritage. Through it all, Finn remained loyal in one conviction, that identity is further than pedigrees and hidden documents, that the love and values inseminated in him by the parents who raised him signified further than any libelous twist of fate. And yet, as the week closed with a moping shot of Taylor alone in her dimly lit study, gaping at an old snap from the night everything changed, it was clear that indeed with the verity exposed, the ripple goods of her stunner would continue to resonate through Los Angeles, setting the stage for indeed deeper competitions, unanticipated alliances, and a redefinition of what it truly means to belong in the ever-turbulent world of the bold and the beautiful. The fallout from Taylor's concession didn't fade with the setting sun over Los Angeles. Rather, it boosted, spreading through the integrated lives of the Forresters, Logans and Finnegans like a slow-burning fuse ready to enkindle at any moment on the bold and the beautiful. Finn slightly slept the night after the DNA results verified what Taylor had admitted. The figures were inarguable, the wisdom irrefragable. The man he'd grown up believing was simply a distant donator. An influential figure who had sometimes crossed paths with his consanguineous parents was, in fact, his natural father. Every nonage memory now felt distorted, as if someone had subtly edited the footage of his life without his authorization. Steffy watched him pace the living room in the early hours before dawn, her heart breaking not only for her hubby but for the fragile balance of her family. As co-CEO of Forrester Creations, she was oriented to extremity operation, to smoothing over dishonors before they could damage the brand. But this was into tabloid scuttlebutt or a rival's sabotage. This was blood. This was lineage. And in the Forrester world, pedigrees meant everything. By morning, word had formally begun to circulate through the manse. Ridge plotted to contain his fury not at Finn, but at Taylor. He felt blindsided, betrayed that she had kept such a monumental verity, hidden not only from Finn but from him as well. Brooke, ever perceptive, noticed the pressure incontinently. Though her history with Taylor was fraught with contest and resentment, indeed she honored the graveness of the situation. For formerly, this wasn't about old romantic competition. This was about a son discovering that his life had been erected on a precisely constructed illusion. Finn requested a private meeting with the man now verified as his natural father. The meeting was tense from the launch. Times of implied knowledge hung heavy in the air. The man admitted that he'd known the verity for decades, but had agreed to Taylor's plan, believing it was the only way to cover everyone involved from reproach and public scrutiny. He claimed that from a distance he'd watched Finn grow, still funding educational openings, icing doors open without ever stepping forward to claim credit. But to Finn that felt less like love and more like control. "You don't get to curate my life and call it protection," he said, his voice steady but laced with pain. "You don't get to decide who I am." The emotional battle resounded far beyond that room. Steffy set up herself caught between defending her hubby and defying her mama. Taylor, overwhelmed by guilt, tried to explain the environment of her decision, how vulnerable she had been, how important forces at play had hovered to destroy reports and futures. She admitted that she had induced herself she was acting in Finn's stylish interest, sparing him from being born into a storm of reproach. Yet intentions did little to soothe the damage. Finn began questioning everything: his career choice, his connection to the Forrester family, indeed the intensity of his bond with Steffy. Was it fate? Coexistence? Or had some subconscious gravitational pull drawn him toward his natural roots each along? As pressures escalated, a press leak hovered to expose the story intimately. A former sanitarium director, long resentful over being sidelined times agone, suggested at medical record tampering involving prominent Los Angeles families. The possibility of a media delirium impended. Forrester Creations board members shocked at the study of captions tying the company to a decades-old cover-up. Steffy stepped into extremity mode, organizing a strategy meeting at the office. She made it clear that guarding Finn, not the brand, was her top precedence. This protestation surprised some board members, who were oriented to commercial-first opinions. But Steffy's resoluteness was unwavering. "Family comes before fashion," she claimed. Meanwhile, Taylor made a bold decision of her own. She called a press conference. Determined to help Enterprise from twisting out of control, she chose to intimately admit her part in altering the records. Standing before flashing cameras, she conceded her mistake, framing it as a deceived attempt to cover a child from getting contributory damage in a high-profile reproach. Her vulnerability shifted public perception. Rather than outrage, numerous expressed empathy. Finn watched the broadcast with mixed feelings. Seeing his mama take responsibility softened some of his wrathfulness, but it didn't abolish the times of secretiveness. Healing, he realized, would bear further than justifications. The battle between Finn and his natural father reached a turning point days laterally when the man suffered a minor cardiac occasion brought on by stress. As a croaker, Finn was thrust into the part of caregiver. The irony was profound, treating the veritably man who had hidden in the murk of his life. In that sanitarium room, stripped of power and prestige, the man sounded lower, more mortal. He confessed that fear had mandated his choices. Fear of reproach. Fear of losing everything. Fear of hurting the woman he formerly loved, Taylor. "I allowed. Staying down was the noble thing," he said weakly. "But I see now that absence can wound just as deeply as treason." The vulnerability shifted commodity in Finn. Not remission, not yet, but understanding. And understanding was a launch. Back at the Forrester manse, Ridge and Brooke set up themselves, reflecting on their own once miscalculations. Secrets had defined their history as much as love had. For formerly, Brooke extended an olive branch to Taylor, admitting the insolvable position she must have been in all those times agone. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step toward collective compassion. Steffy and Finn's marriage faced its own reckoning. Late one evening, after putting the children to bed, they sat together in silence. Finn admitted his deepest fear that discovering this verity might unnaturally change him. Steffy took his hands and reminded him that identity isn't mandated by biology alone. "You're the man who chose to save lives," she said vocally. "You're the man who chose me. That's who you are." Her words predicated him. He realized that while he couldn't control the circumstances of his birth, he could control the narrative moving forward. In a surprising twist, Finn decided to intimately admit his natural father, not as a recovery of status or power, but as a statement of translucency. He emphasized gratefulness for the parents who raised him while admitting the complicated verity of his origins. The honesty reverberated with the public, transubstantiating what could have been reproach into a story of conciliation. Yet beneath the face, pressures remained. Not everyone within the Forrester circle ate the new dynamic. Some upset about heritage counteraccusations, about shifts in commercial influence. Old battles hovered to resurface under the guise of concern. Taylor, though relieved the secret was no longer festering, plotted intimately with moping shame. She began attending remedy again, defying not only the once decision but the pattern of secretiveness that had followed her through life. Growth, she realized, needed defying uncomfortable trueness about herself. As weeks passed, Finn sluggishly began forging a conservative relationship with his natural father. They met for coffee, for exchanges not about business or heritage, but about participated interests and missed times. It wasn't the bond of a continuance, but it was real. The saga left an endless mark on every character involved. For Steffy, it corroborated the fragility of stability in a world erected on drama. For Ridge and Brooke, it was a memorial that history has a way of resurfacing. For Taylor, it was both a reckoning and a release. And for Finn, it was a metamorphosis. The shocking verity about his identity had shattered the vision of certainty, but in the process, it forced him to review himself on his own terms. No longer the unwitting product of retired opinions, he stepped into his future with eyes wide open. In the ever-evolving shade of love, treason, redemption, and adaptability that defines the bold and the beautiful, this stunner did further than expose a secret. It reshaped a heritage. And as the camera dallied on Finn standing beside Steffy, their hands intertwined against the background of the Los Angeles skyline. One thing was certain: while blood may connect families, it's choice that eventually defines them. The weeks that followed the public disclosure marked a profound shift in the emotional geography of the bold and the beautiful, as Finn's world continued to recalibrate in ways he no way could have anticipated. Though the original shockwaves had settled into a fragile calm, the swings of change ran deep, subtly altering connections, precedences, and power dynamics throughout Los Angeles. At the Precipice House, mornings felt different. Not tense exactly, but heavier, more reflective. Finn set up himself, waking earlier than usual, standing at the panoramic windows overlooking the Pacific, meaning the strange duality of his identity. He was still Dr. John Finnegan, devoted croaker, hubby, father. Yet he was also the natural son of an important man whose name carried weight in boardrooms and social circles across the megacity. That binary mindfulness felt like walking with an unnoticeable shadow. Steffy noticed the soul-searching but didn't push. She had learned that Finn reused effects internally before speaking. Rather, she concentrated on buttressing normality. Family breakfasts, academy drop-offs, design meetings at Forrester Creations. Stability, she believed, was the cure to chaos. But outside their home, stability was harder to maintain. The board at Forrester Creations convened an exigency strategy session, not because of reproach presently, but because of occasion. Investors saw implicit community in Finn's recently revealed lineage. Some suggested using the story into a humanitarian crusade, centered around medical ethics and translucency, aligning the Forrester brand with redemption and responsibility. Steffy shut that idea down incontinently. "My hubby isn't a marketing strategy," she said forcefully, her tone echoing through the satiny conference room. "His identity isn't a crusade." Her station earned quiet respect from some, and silent resentment from others who prioritized profit over principle. Meanwhile, Taylor faced professional scrutiny. Though public opinion had largely softened after her press conference, the medical board initiated a formal review of her once conduct. The altered birth records, though decades old, represented a serious ethical breach. Taylor cooperated completely, determined to accept whatever consequences came. In private moments, she scuffled with guilt, not only for the deception, but for the unintended ripple goods it had unleashed. One autumn, Finn surprised her by visiting her office. Their relationship had been strained since the disclosure. Exchanges were polite but guarded. That day, still, Finn's address carried commodity new, measured compassion. "I've been allowing," he began. "About fear. About how it shapes opinions." Taylor's eyes glistered, doubtful where he was going. "I do'n't agree with what you did," he continued. "But I understand the fear behind it. And I do'n't want fear to define what happens coming between us." It wasn't full remission, but it was a ground. Across city, Finn's natural father, still recovering from his cardiac occasion, made a decision of his own. He stepped down from several commercial boards, intimately citing a desire to concentrate on particular matters in health. Intimately, he commended to Finn that the experience had shifted his precedences. Power and prestige felt concave compared to the possibility of erecting a genuine relationship with his son. They began meeting daily. Occasionally at the sanitarium cafeteria. Occasionally at a quiet Deepwater cafe. Exchanges were conditional at first, circling safe motifs: drug, trip, nonage recollections. Gradationally they ventured deeper. Finn asked the question that had dallied since